Week 13. Last week, I was supposed to hook up the user interface to the guest user interface to the Supabase backend. I did do that, and it's working. But as soon as I did that, I realized that there's some performance issues. Specifically, every time when the guest user interface refreshes, it hits the database a dozen times. Right? That really shouldn't happen. At the very least, would make the user experience very bad, because instead of making one call, you're making 10 calls. At the very worst, once it does go onto the market, it probably will have me pay through my nose to Supabase for the hits that I do to their databases. And I looked into my code, realized in the repository there's a lot of, let's say, unoptimized code. They work. It's just, they're not written very, with a lot of consideration. And I'm beginning to realize that perhaps I should pay a little more attention to the foundation before I start to make the whole thing work. So last week I started refactoring of my repo, my domain layer, my data layer. And I went into this rabbit hole of optimizations, right? I mean, there is a thing where you can over-optimize things, but I think in my case it's literally on the opposite side. I considered converting a lot of the client-side calls into Postgres functions, right? So instead of having the client do all the work, which makes the performance worse in general and also introduces security concerns, I wanted to use the database functions that the client can call. That theoretically would make it quite a bit faster, and also, I don't have to expose the sensitive information to the client in order for the logic to be run. So that's in progress, and I am expecting that it will take the entire next week to actually complete it. And the other thing that I ran into was, I was using the separation of layers to some extent, but I didn't really think that I needed a lot of that, because at least in my mind, initially, I didn't think the app would be complicated enough to warrant sort of boilerplate stuff, right? Different folders, different layers and whatnot. So in my repo, originally I put all the functions, all the methods into one repo. And as the functionality started to, as the app functionalities started to manifest themselves through my UI design, I realized that I needed more and more tables in my database. And so before last week, all the functions that deal with multiple tables, and some of them exclusively some other tables, are all squeezed into one repo. And obviously I haven't looked at the memory footprint of the app. I really don't think that's going to be a concern. But just from the management perspective, like the code maintenance perspective, it's starting to get unwieldy, right? I had to scroll, do this on my middle button scroll all the way, hundreds of lines to get to the method that I want, or that's not the way to do it. So I needed to refactor that. It's just sort of like building a house. You gotta get the foundation right, man. I'm paying the price for not doing that. So that was last week, and not a lot of progress made on the sort of the app and the UI side, but I hope the effort I'm putting into sort of making the app infrastructure more robust would pay dividends down the line. So next week, the goal is to complete the refactor of the data layer and start looking into my business logic and see if I can optimize some of it. I mean, I know I can. There are duplicate methods that do essentially the same thing. You could consolidate them with overloads, or anyways, there are a lot of things I could do to think about optimizations. So next week, optimize. That's it for this week. I'll see you next week.